So let's go ahead and build together a pipeline from scratch to better understand what a data pipeline is all about. So we definitely subscribe by the philosophy that we learn best by doing. So the first thing that we got to do is we're gonna tell DataJoint what database we'll be using. And here for our session, we have our own database, host. And so we're gonna run this cell. And this database is called tutorial-db.datajoint.io. So now we're telling DataJoint, all right, this is the database that we're using. Next, we're gonna connect. So now that we're connected to the database, we gotta let DataJoint and the database know who we are. So I'm gonna put in my username. You can go ahead and put in your own username. And DataJoint is gonna prompt you to put in your password as well. Awesome, so you should see a cell saying connecting with your username at tutorial-db. All right, so far so good. Now let's create our pipeline. But before we create our pipeline, I wanna touch on this concept of a schema. And Kabi touched on it as well. And so I'm just gonna reinforce what he had said. And every table lives inside a schema. And a schema is a logical collection of one or more tables in your pipeline. Your final pipeline consists of many tables spread across one or more schemas. So let's go ahead and create the first schema to house our table. So in some experiments, you may have like a lab schema, and then inside that schema, you have all the different tables giving us data, metadata about the lab. You might have your subject schema, and you have all the different tables giving you metadata about your subject. And so those are how schemas work. For the sake of our session here, you'll put in your own username right there. I already put in mine. So my username is David Godinez 14. You can make sure to put your own one in. So we'll run this cell. And so now we're telling DataJoint, using the dj.schema method, we're telling us that this is the name of our schema. And when we run schema, excellent. So let me do something here really quickly. I'm just gonna clear all my outputs. All right, so we ran this, excellent. Now that we've created our schema, we're ready to start putting tables into it. So so the way the syntax works, and I'll go line by line, is you have this @schema decorator here, and it lets DataJoint know that this is where you want to insert the table. And then when defining the table, you'll have your table is going to be defined as a class, and you give your table a name. In this case, we'll call our table mouse. You could probably guess the purpose of our table. And we'll use a dj.manual. So what that means is we're telling DataJoint that we want to define a table called mouse, and this table is going to be a manual table, meaning that we'll manually put information inside. When we define the table itself, we'll use a multi-line docstring. And for the first line and so this docstring is encompassed in our quotation marks, right? So 3 at the top, 3 at the bottom. And so we can start off by putting a comment here, experimental animals in this case. And this just lets any future user know, it gives them a bit of a short description about what the table is about. And so it's not necessary, but we encourage you to do it. So you have your docstring. And so now we'll start defining our columns. So our first column is going to be mouse ID. And we let DataJoint know that mouse ID is an integer. And we can put another comment right here. It's a unique animal ID. I want you guys to pay close attention here to these three lines, the dashes. And so you can see clearly that there's a kind of separation between mouse ID and these other two columns. So whatever goes on top of these dashes lets DataJoint know that this is a primary attribute. Now, a primary attribute is a unique identifier for that specific table. So mouse ID, these are going to be unique identifiers to the mice inside the table. The next two columns we have are date of birth, and the default value for date of birth, DOB, is null. And we let DataJoint know that it is a date type. Of course, we have our comment. And the second column, or the third column, is sex, and its default is unknown. And this is an enum type, enumerate type, which could be of values M for male, F for female, or unknown. So let's define it. And awesome. So we've defined our first table, and now we're gonna run it. And so the syntax is you call the table name, and you have your parentheses here. Beautiful. So now we have our first table inside our first schema. You can see that our comment here pops up at the top, experimental animals. You can see that the mouse ID is bolded, right? So it lets the user know that this is your primary attribute. And then the secondary attributes, date of birth and sex. And if you, DataJoint does a bunch of really neat things, but this is one of them. If you hover over the table titles, you'll see these comments that were here. You can see them pop up to give you even more information about each column. But our table here, so now that we've defined our table, we're gonna take a look at this method to view our pipeline. And this is the dj.diagram method. So the dj.diagram method is a extremely powerful method inside DataJoint, and it allows any user to get an accurate visual representation of, you can look at the relationships between specific tables, you can look at the relationships between schemas, individual schemas, anything inside DataJoint, you can look at it using the dj.diagram. So right now we have one table, mouse, and inside the schema. And yes, and if you, yes. So as we've seen, our table is a little empty right now. So I think it's time for us to insert some data. So we have data, and we're going to use a dictionary to insert said data. And the way you use this dictionary is, if you recall, there were three different columns. There was mouse ID, there was date of birth, and there was sex. So we're going to use each column name as our key, and then we'll insert the value for each key. So you have mouse ID, 0, date of birth, May 21st, 2021, and sex, female. And to insert data, you use one way to insert data is to use the insert one method on the table. So we want to insert data inside mouse. And since we have our variable here, you run it. Beautiful. And let's see. Excellent. So our mouse table, where data has been inserted into the mouse table. So a very quick question for you guys, and I want to make this interactive. So since this is a manual process, right? You have to put in all the data yourself. Do you think that we're constrained to just entering data one at a time? Do you think that DataJoint probably offers another way to enter data? And so you guys can unmute yourselves, or you can type in the chat.
think that's for individual experiments that you can enter the data.
I'm sorry, Esther.
Can you enter the data for individual experiments?
I think my mic is acting up, my speakers are acting up a little bit, but I see Brooks saying that, yes, there's probably another way to enter data. And I believe that you're saying the same. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Esther, but thank you. So let's try to enter more data at a time. So we'll define a list of, so we saw that we can enter data using a dictionary, right? And if you want to enter more than one entry, you can use a list of dictionaries. So in this case, we already have mouse 0. So we'll enter mouse 1, we'll enter mouse 2. So we saw that to enter data, we used the .insert1 method. Do we believe that this method is still going to work for entering multiple rows of data? So the question is, do we believe that the .insert1 method will work?
You presumably need to have a second label for each mouse.
Can you say that one more time, Esther, please?
You have a separate ID for each mouse.
I'm not sure. Give me, let me see here. No, I don't want it. Just
I also have a bit of a hard time hearing Esther as well. Maybe the mic is far away from.
Yeah, thank you, Tim.
I think we're having problems with the microphone.
Maybe if you don't mind typing it, Esther, please. But so let's try, let's see. So we have multiple entries, and let's use the insert1 method. And so we see that DataJoint complains. It's telling us, hey, invalid insert argument, right? And so that's because the insert1 method is used to enter one row of data, right? To enter data one at a time. So can you enter data manually for each subject? Yes, so as long as your table is a manual table, Esther, yes, you enter data manually. And so what we're showing now is how to enter multiple entries at the same time. So apart from the insert1 method, DataJoint also has the insert method. So as you might imagine, the insert method allows you to enter multiple values at a time. So we see that DataJoint was happy with this. It didn't complain this time. And let's take a look at our mouse table now. Excellent. So we can see that we now have mouse 0, mouse 1, and mouse 2, along with their dates of birth and their sex. So I think we're all having fun here inserting data. So let's insert a bit more data. Awesome. So now our table looks good. It's full, it looks real populated, right? And so that's our mouse table. And let's look at our schema.